This feels good. Come up to the fire, ladies.
I'm not cold.
Now, Mr. Hale, before we move things about, explain to Mr. Henderson what you saw here when you came here yesterday morning. By the way, have things moved? Are they just the way you left them yesterday? It's just the same. When it dropped below zero last night, I thought I better send Frank out this morning to make a fire for us. No use getting pneumonia with a big case on, but I told him not to touch anything except the stove. And you know Frank. Somebody should have been left here yesterday.
Oh, yesterday, when I had to take Frank to Morris Center for that man who went crazy. I want you to know I had my hands full yesterday. I knew you could get back from Omaha by today as long as I took care of everything here myself. Well, Mr. Hale, tell just what happened when you came here yesterday morning. Harry and I had started to town with a sack of potatoes. We came out the road from my place, and as I got here, I said, I wonder if I can't get John Wright to go in with me on a party telephone. I spoke to Wright about it once before, but he said that people talk too much anyway. And all he wanted was some peace and quiet. I guess you know about how much John talked himself. But I thought if I went over to the house and talked about it before his wife, though I said to Harry, I didn't know as what his wife wanted made much difference to John. Let's talk about that later, Mr. Hale. I do want to talk about that, but till now, just what happened when you came to the house. I didn't hear or see anything. I knocked at the door, and still all was quiet. So I knocked again. I knew they must be up. It was past 8 o'clock. Well, I knocked, and I thought I heard someone say, "Come in." I wasn't sure. I'm still not sure. But I opened the door. This door. And there, in that rocker, sat Mrs. Wright.
County Attorney. What was she doing? Hale. She was rocking back and forth. She had her apron in her hand and was kind of pleating it. County Attorney. And how did she look? Hale. Well, she looked queer. County Attorney. How do you mean queer? Hale. Well, as if she didn't know what she was going to do next, and kind of done up. County Attorney. How did she seem to feel about your coming? Hale. Why, I don't think she minded, one way or other. She didn't pay much attention. I said, "How do, Mrs. Wright? It's cold, ain't it?" And she said, "Is it?" and went on kind of pleating at her apron. Well, I was surprised. She didn't ask me to come up to the stove or to sit down, but I just sat there, not even looking at me. So I said, "I want to see John." And then she laughed. I guess you could call it a laugh. I thought of Harry and the team outside, so I said a little sharp, "Can't I see John?" "No," she says, kind of dull-like. "Ain't he home?" says I. "Yes," says she, "he's home." "Then why can't I see him?" I asked her out of patience. "'Cause he's dead," says she. "Dead?" says I. She just nodded her head, not getting a bit excited, but rocking back and forth. "Why, where is she?" says I, not knowing what to say. She just pointed upstairs like that.
I got up with the idea of going up there. I walked from there to here. Then I says, "Why, what did he die of?" "He died of a rope around his neck," says she, and just went on pleating at her apron. Well, I went out and called Harry. I thought I might need help. We went upstairs, and there he was, lying.
I think I'd rather have you go into that upstairs, where you can point it all out. Just go on now with the rest of the story.
Well, my first thought was to get that rope off. It looked. But Harry, He went up to him and he said, "Nah, he's dead all right, and we better not touch anything." So we went back downstairs. She was still sitting that same way. "Has anybody been notified?" I asked. "No," says she, unconcerned. "Who did this, Mrs. Wright?" said Harry. He said it business-like, and she stopped pleating of her apron. "I don't know," she says. "You don't know?" says Harry. "No," says she. "Weren't you sleeping in the bed with him?" says Harry. "Yes," says she, "but I was on the inside." "Somebody slipped a rope around his neck and strangled him, and you didn't wake up," says Harry. "I didn't wake up," she said after him. We must have looked as if we didn't see how that could be, for after a minute she said, "I sleep sound." Harry was going to ask her more questions, but I said maybe we ought to let her tell her story first to the coroner or the sheriff. So Harry went as fast as he could to River's place, where there's a telephone.
And what did Mrs. Wright do when she knew that you had gone for the corner?
She went from that chair to that one over here. And she just sat there with her arms folded looking down. I got a feeling that I ought to make some conversation. And I told her that I asked if John wanted to put in the telephone. And at that she started to laugh. Then she looked at me scared. I don't know, maybe it wasn't scared. Soon Harry got back. Then Dr. Lloyd came, and then you, Mr. Peters. I guess that's all I know that you don't. I guess we'll go upstairs, then go around the barn, then back again. Are you sure there was nothing important here? Nothing that would point to any motive? Nothing here but kitchen things. Ugh, here's a nice mess. Oh, her fruit, it did freeze. She was so worried about him when it got cold. She said her fire got out and her jars would break.
Well, you can beat the woman held for murder and worrying about her preserves. I guess before we're through, she may have something more serious than preserves to worry about. Well, all women are used to worrying over their trifles. And yet, for all their worries, what would we do without the ladies? Dirty towels? Not much of a housekeeper, would you say, ladies? A great deal of work to be done on the farm, to be sure. And yet, I know there are some Dixon County farmhouses which do not have such roller towels.
Those towels get dirty awful quick. Men's hands aren't always as clean as they might be.
Ah, loyal to your sex, I see. But you and Mrs. Wright were neighbors. I suppose you were friends, too.
I've not seen much of her of late years. I've not been in this house. It's more than a year.
And why was that? You didn't like her?
I liked her all well enough. Farmers' wives have their hands full, Mr. Henderson. And then,
Yes?
it never seemed a very cheerful place.
No, it's not cheerful. I shouldn't say she had the homemaking instinct.
Those towels get dirty awful quick. Men's hands aren't always as clean as they might be.
No, I don't mean anything, but I think the place would be any cheerfuler for John Wright's being in it.
I'd like to talk more of that later. I want to get a lay of things upstairs now.
I I suppose anything Mrs. Peters does is alright. She was taking in some clothes for her, and a few things. We left in such a hurry yesterday.
Yes, well, I would like to see what you take, Mrs. Peters, and keep an eye out for anything that might be useful to us.
Yes, Mr.
I'd hate to have men come into my kitchen, snooping around and criticizing. Of course, it's no more than their duty. Duty's all right, but I guess that deputy sheriff that came out to make the fire might have got a little of this on. Wish I'd thought of that sooner. Seems mean to talk about her for not having things slicked up when she had to come away in such a hurry. He had what said? She was going to put this over there. It's a shame about her fruit. I wonder if it's all gone. I think there's some here that's all right. Miss Peters, yes, here. This is curious too. I declare I believe that's the only one she'll feel awful bad about after her hard work in the hot weather. I remember the afternoon I put up my cherries last summer.
Well, I must go get those things from the front room closet. You coming with me, Mrs. Hale? You could help me carry them. My, it's cold in there. Wright was close. I think maybe that's why she kept so much to herself. She didn't even belong to the Ladies' Aid. I suppose she felt she couldn't do her part, and then you don't enjoy things when you feel shabby. She used to wear pretty clothes and be lively when she was Minnie Foster, one of the town girls singing in the choir. But that was 30 years ago. This all you was to take in? She said she wanted an apron. Funny thing to want, for there isn't much to get dirty in jail. Goodness knows, but I suppose just to make her feel more natural, she said they was in the top drawer in the cupboard. Yes, here. And then her little shawl that always hung behind the door. Yes, here it is.
This is 11. Mrs. Hale. Mrs. Peters? Mrs. Peters. Yes, Mrs. Hale? Mrs. Hale. Do you think she did it? Mrs. Peters, in a frightened voice. Oh, I don't know. Mrs. Hale. Well, I don't think she did. Asking for an apron and her little shawl, worrying about her fruit. Mrs. Peters. Mr. Peters says it looks bad for her. Mr. Henderson is awful sarcastic in his speech, and he'll make fun of her saying she didn't wake up. Mrs. Hale. Well, I guess John Wright didn't wake when they was slipping that rope under his neck.
No, it's strange. It must have been done awfully crafty and still. They say it was such a funny way to kill a man, rigging it all up like that.
That's just what Mr. Crow said. There was a gun in the house, and that's what he can't understand.
Mr. Henderson said that coming out what we needed for this case was a motive. Something to show anger or some feeling.
Well, I don't see any anger signs around here. It's wiped up to here. Wonder how they are finding things upstairs. I mean, I hope she had a little more read up there, you know? It seems kind of sneaking. looking her up in town and then coming out here and trying to get her own house to turn against her?
But Mrs. Hale, the law is the law. I suppose it is. Better loosen up your things, Mrs. Peters. You won't feel them when you go out. She was piecing a quilt. It's a log cabin pattern. Pretty, isn't it? I wonder if she was going to quilt it or just knot it.
They wondered if she was going to quilt it or just knot it. Frank's fire didn't do much up there, did it? Well, let's go out to the bar and get that cleared up.
I don't see as there's anything so strange. Are taking up our time with the little things while waiting for them to get the evidence. I don't see as anything to laugh about.
Of course, they've got awful important things on their minds.
Miss Peters.
Miss Peters, look at this. Here's the one she was working on. Look at the sewing. Up until now, they've been all nice and even. Look at this! It's all over the place! Like she didn't even know what she was about! Oh, what are you doing, Miss Hale? Just pulling out one or two stitches that are not so very good. Bad sewing always made me fidgety.
I don't think we ought to touch things. I'll just finish up this end. Mrs. Peters? Yes, Mrs. Hale? What do you suppose she was so nervous about? I don't know. I don't know if she's as nervous. I sometimes so awful queer when I'm just tired. Well, I must get these things wrapped up. They may be through sooner than we think. I wonder I can find a piece of paper or a string. In that cupboard, maybe. Why, here's a bird cage. Did she have a bird, Mrs. Hale? I don't know whether she did or not. I've not been here for so long. There was a man around here last year selling canaries cheap, but I don't know if she took one. Maybe she did. She used to sing real pretty herself.
Funny to think of a bird here, but she must have had one, or why would she have a cage? I wonder what happened to it.
I suppose the cat got it.
She didn't have a cat. She got that feeling some people have about cats, being afraid of them. My cat got in her room one time, and she was real upset about it. She asked me to take it out.
My sister Betty was like that. Queer, ain't it?
Look at that door. It's broke. One hinge is pulled off the other.
Looks as if someone was rough with it.
Why, yes.
This is 18. Mrs. Hale, I wish they're going to find any evidence they'd be about it. I didn't like this place. Mrs. Peters. But I'm awful glad you came with me, Mrs. Hale. I would be lonesome for me sitting here alone. Mrs. Hale. It would, wouldn't it? But I tell you what I do wish, Mrs. Peters. I wish I had come over sometimes when she was here. I wish I had, Mrs. Peters. But of course you were awful busy, Mrs. Hale. Your house and your children. Mrs. Hale, I could have come. I stayed away because it weren't cheerful, and that's why I ought to have come. I've never liked this place. Maybe because it's down in a hollow and you don't see the road. I don't know what it is, but it's a lonesome place. It always was. I wish I'd come over to see Minnie Foster sometimes. I can see now. This is 19. Mrs. Peters. Well, you mustn't reproach yourself, Mrs. Hale. Somehow we just don't see how it is with other folks until something comes up. Mrs. Hale. Not having children makes less work, but it makes a quiet house. And Wright out to work all day, and no company when he did come in. Did you know John Wright, Mrs. Peters? Mrs. Peters. Not to know him. I've seen him in town. They say he was a good man. Mrs. Hale. Yes, good. He didn't drink, and kept his word as well as most, I guess, and paid his debts. But he was a hard man, Mrs. Peters. Just to pass the time of day with him, like a raw wind that gets to the bone. I should think she would have wanted a bird. But what do you suppose went with it? Mrs. Peters. I don't know, unless it got sick and died.
When is dinner gonna be ready? You're done with your play. It's literally like 5 lines.
Yeah, dude. Ain't nobody telling me nothing.
Yeah, that's why you still don't hold up higher. Because, like, you're, like, barely over. This? You know, like, this is the ground.
Oh, thank you.
There you go, got it. How did you do that? Oh.
Oh, wait. I can't do that. I know. Not like you watching. 5 is 5. It's all numbers, by the way.
Here we go again.
That was 12 digits, by the way.
Oh, it's the 1984995 Like that number, the SSID.
No, not 0, 0, 0, 1, 2, 4, 4, 4, 8. It's not bad.
I'm really sweaty.
My hands are really cold.
We had a wreck Wednesday, sorry.
That was an accident.
Yes, it was. Did the horn get you?
Just Thomas, when you do this on this time, or else I'm not going to be rude. Okay. No, I'm waiting. I'm just gonna. Ooh, I need a basket sort of thing. Yes, I do. Prop this thing with basket. Okay, just gotta. Okay, Thomas. Just gonna have to put that back
I need to
there.
get my hand.
Okay, I can do that.
Okay. My hand's so sweaty, I can't get it in the bag.
I know.
Gosh. Okay, let's go. Wait. Okay, let's go. Wait. Let's go.
What are you doing?
Okay, we're good.
You need to sit up and raise it higher, Thomas.
Like right here.
Yeah, actually. So the goat is Mrs. Peters and the fish is Mrs. Hale. Remember to enunciate.
You weren't raised around here, were you? You didn't know her?
Not to tell
about her yesterday.
Come to think of it, she was kind of like a bird herself. Real sweet and pretty, but kind of timid and fluttery. How she did change. Tell you what, Mrs. Peters, why don't you take the quilt with you? It might take up her mind.
Why, I think that's a real nice idea, Mrs. Hale. There couldn't possibly be any objection to it, could there? Now, just what would I take? I wonder if her patches are in here, and her things.
Here's some red. I expect this has got sewing things in it. What a pretty box. Looks like something somebody would give you. Maybe her scissors are in here. Why? There's something wrapped up in this piece of silk. Da, da, da.
Arm. I know. It's like, eek. Gosh. And that's the answer. Okay. I think that was okay except for that last part. When I go,
Here's some red.
I got no horses in the back. Horse carriers are tenors. Manny, let's bring that to me. Horses back to man. Right here. Let's watch it on the camera. Yeah, boy. Well, this isn't her scissors.
Mrs. Peters, it's
the bird!
Look at its neck! Look at its neck! Oh, the other side, too.
Somebody writes neck.
Well, ladies, is she going to quilt it or knot it?
Well, we think she's gonna knot it.
22. County Attorney. Well, that's interesting, I'm sure. Has the bird flown? Mrs. Hale. We think the cat got it. County Attorney. Is there a cat? Mrs. Peters. Well, not now. They're superstitious, you know. They leave. County Attorney. To Sheriff Peters. No sign at all of anyone coming in from the outside. Their own rope. Now let's go up again and go over it piece by piece. It would just have to have been someone who knew just the... Mrs. Hale. She liked the bird. She was going to bury it in that pretty box.
When I was a girl, my kitten, there was a boy took a hatchet, and before my eyes, and before I could get there, if they hadn't held me back, I would have hurt him. I wonder how it would seem never to have had any children around. No, Wright wouldn't like the bird, a thing that sang. She used to sing. He killed that, too. We don't know who killed the bird. I knew John Wright. It was an awful thing was done in this house that night, Mrs. Hale. Killing a man while he slept, slipping a rope around his neck that choked the life out of him.
His neck choked the life out of him. We don't know who killed him. We don't know. If there had been years and years of nothing, then a bird sing to you, it would be awful. Still, after the bird was still.
I know what stillness is. When we homesteaded in Dakota and my first baby died after he was 2 years old, and it was me with no other than...
How soon do you suppose that they'll be through looking for evidence? The law has got to punish crime, Miss Hale.
I wish you'd known Minnie Foster when she wore a white dress, blue ribbons, and stood up there at the choir and sang. Oh, I wish I'd come over here once in a while. Crime! That was a crime! Who's gonna punish that?
We mustn't take on. I might have known she needed help. I know how things can be for women. I tell you, it's queer. Mrs. Peters, we live close together and we live far apart. We go through all the same things. It's all just a different kind of the same thing. If I was you, I wouldn't tell her the fruit was gone. Tell her it ain't. Tell her it's all right. Take this in to prove it to her. She may never know whether it was broke or not. My, it's a good thing the men can't hear us. Wouldn't they just laugh? Getting all stirred up over a little thing like a dead canary. As if that could have anything to do with... Wouldn't they just laugh? Maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't. No, Peters, it's all perfectly clear except a reason for doing it. But you know juries when it comes to women. If there was some definite thing, something to show, something that they could make a story about, a thing that would connect this with the strange way of doing it.
This is 27. Hale. Well, I've got the team around. Pretty cold out there. County Attorney. I'm gonna stay here a while by myself. You can send Frank out for me, can't you? I want to go over everything. I'm not satisfied that we can't do better. Sheriff. Do you want to see what Mrs. Peters is going to take in? County Attorney. Oh, I guess they have not very dangerous things the ladies have picked out. No, Mrs. Peters doesn't need supervising. For that matter, a sheriff's wife is married to the law. Ever think about it that way, Mrs. Peters? Mrs. Peters. Not just that way.
Married to the law. I just want you to come here a minute, George. We ought to take a look at these windows. Oh, windows. We'll be right out, Mr. Hale. Well, Henry, at least we found out she was not going to quilt it. She was going to... what do you call it, ladies?
We call it not it, Mr. Henderson.